I stood alone beside the casket, clutching the funeral program with my son's name printed wrong. Everyone kept looking at me, not saying a word, but I could feel it. The unspoken question burned through their eyes. Where was my son at that exact moment? He was raising a glass of champagne in Vegas, cheering for his wife's birthday, while I signed the final papers to bury his father. That morning, I lost the love of my life. That evening, I lost the illusion that my son still loved me. Stay with me till the very end, and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far the truth really spreads. My name is Susan. I'm 62 years old, and this morning I buried my husband. His name was Tom, and we had been married for 40 years. 40 years of memories of love that grew stronger even as our hair turned gray and our steps slowed down. We met when we were both 22. He had just started working in insurance, and I was waitressing evenings to help my mom with rent. We didn't have much, but we had each other. He made me laugh even when we couldn't afford groceries. I never thought I'd have to say goodbye to him so suddenly. But this past week, cancer didn't ask for permission. This morning, I stood at the gravesite holding a white rose in one hand and the folded flag they handed me in the other. Tom had served in the Navy. He was proud of that, even though he never talked much about it. The priest read a psalm, the wind was cold, and my knees barely held me upright. My son Ethan wasn't there. I tried to call him before the burial started. I stood outside the chapel, shaking my hand, gripping the phone like it could anchor me. It rang twice, and then came the music, heavy bass, yelling glasses, clinking. Then his voice. Loud, drunk, careless. He laughed over the phone and shouted, "Mom can't hear you." Madison's birthday's LIT. I didn't say a word. I just held the phone frozen, listening to the sound of people celebrating while I stood in black beside my husband's casket. I ended the call without replying. I didn't want my last moment with Tom on this earth to be polluted by that noise. After the service, I went back into the funeral home to sign the paperwork. Final release. Burial certificate. Cremation authorization for the extra remains we couldn't lower into the ground. The woman behind the desk was kind. Her voice was soft. She handed me a pen, and I tried to keep my hand steady. As I signed, my phone buzzed. A notification from Madison's Instagram. Madison, my daughter-in-law. She had tagged Ethan. I made the mistake of opening it. A boomerang of champagne bottles popping. Madison laughing, wearing a sequin dress. The caption said 30 and thriving. Ethan stood behind her, arm around her waist, toasting to the camera. That's when the second loss hit. I had already buried my husband, but something deeper, something colder settled inside me. I realized Ethan wasn't just missing. He had chosen to be gone. Chosen to toast a party over mourning his father. Chosen noise over silent spectacle, over grief celebration, over memory. That morning, I buried my husband. That evening, I buried my illusions about my son. I drove home alone. The house felt like an echo. I left the TV off, the lights dim. Tom's favorite slippers were still under the coffee table. I couldn't bring myself to move them. The air in the house had changed. It used to hum with warmth. That night, it was just empty. I sat on the couch with my coat still on. I stared at the photo on the wall, Tom holding Ethan on his shoulders when he was 5. Ethan's smile was pure joy. Back then, he used to draw pictures for us with crayon hearts and crooked stick arms. We used to call him our little heartbeat. I wanted to cry, but the tears didn't come. It wasn't the kind of pain that spills out. It was the kind that hardens, that settles in your bones and makes everything feel heavier. I thought of calling him again. Just once. To ask why. To ask how. But what was the point? He had shown me all I needed to know. He had made a choice. And it wasn't me. It wasn't his father. It wasn't respect. It was a party. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room until sunrise Tom's picture in my lap, the folded flag on the table beside me. For the first time in my life, I felt like a mother without a son. And yet, strangely, I also felt something I hadn't expected. A beginning. Not of healing, not yet. But of clarity. Of seeing things the way they really were. I had lost the man who held my hand through every storm. And I had lost the boy I raised with every ounce of love I had. But maybe in that stillness, I was starting to find myself again. We started in a one-bedroom apartment in Charlotte just off South Tryon Street. It had rust on the radiator and creaked with every step, but it was ours. Tom used to say it was too small to get lost in, which he liked, because it meant we always had to be close. Back then, we didn't have much, but we had so much more than we realized. Tom worked 12-hour days at the insurance office. I waitressed at night and cleaned houses during the day. For a while, I also helped an older neighbor with her bookkeeping just to cover gas. There were nights we didn't have meat for dinner. I learned to stretch canned beans with rice and sprinkle and whatever spices we had. Tom never complained. He'd take my hand across the table and say it tasted like home. When Ethan was born, everything shifted. The world suddenly got heavier and brighter at the same time. Tom cried when he first held him. I'd never seen his hands tremble like that. We didn't care that we had to use coupons for diapers or buy secondhand toys. Every bit of exhaustion felt worth it. I remember the winter Ethan turned 5. We couldn't afford to rent a venue for his birthday, so we cleared the living room and hung streamers from the ceiling fan. I stayed up for 3 nights sewing cloth table covers by hand. I had found fabric with little trains on clearance and stitched them until my fingers blistered. Tom helped me blow up balloons until they stuck to the ceiling from static. That morning, Ethan ran into the room in his pajamas and screamed with joy. He hugged me so tight I thought my heart might crack open. He told everyone at the party that his mommy made everything by herself. That moment, just those words made every dollar we didn't have feel irrelevant. We did everything for him. When he said he wanted to go to Duke, I smiled even though I knew we couldn't afford it. I took on a 3rd job managing weekend events at a local community center. Tom stopped replacing his car, even when the engine sounded like it was wheezing. We saved every cent, and Ethan got in. I still remember standing in the driveway waving as he drove off in a borrowed car with his dorm supplies stuffed into trash bags. I cried for 3 hours after he left. Tom held me saying we'd done something right. And I believed him. At Duke, Ethan changed. Not all at once, but little by little. He stopped calling as often, said he was busy, which I understood. College is a different world. But something about his tone became sharper, more detached. He didn't laugh the same way. When we visited, he seemed distracted, always checking his phone. Then he met Madison. He didn't bring her home at first. Just mentioned her name offhand. Said she came from a family in the Northeast that her parents were into real estate. I remember trying to be enthusiastic. I asked if she was kind. He said she was classy. The first time we met her was at Christmas. She didn't look up from her phone during dinner. When I offered her a second helping, she blinked slowly and said she was avoiding carbs. I brushed it off, tried to find common ground. But she wasn't interested in conversation. Only in correcting Ethan's posture and his way of pronouncing certain words. Still, I kept trying. For years I told myself it was just adjustment, that Ethan would come back around. But the more time passed, the more distant he became. He stopped calling me Mom. He started saying Susan like I was a client. Tom never said it outright, but I think it hurt him deeply. He kept Ethan's childhood drawings in his desk drawer. He used to reread them when the house got too quiet. One night, Tom asked me if I remembered when Ethan used to sit on his shoulders and pretend they were a mountain. I nodded, and neither of us said anything after that. It felt like we both knew the mountain had crumbled. But through it all, I still held on to the memories. The way Ethan used to run barefoot through the sprinklers in our backyard. The times he begged for one more bedtime story and curled into my lap with a blanket shaped like a shark. The way he once kissed my hand and said I was magic. Those are the pieces I carry. Not the man who ignored my calls or left me alone at a funeral. Not the stranger who laughed during his wife's birthday while I wept beside a grave. I hold on to the boy I once knew. The one who beamed with pride over homemade tablecloths and asked for his mom when he had nightmares. That boy still lives somewhere in my heart. But the man he became, that's someone else entirely. It didn't happen all at once. That's the cruel part. If Ethan had slammed a door or screamed that he was done with me, maybe I could have processed it. But it was quieter than that. Slower. It crept in one small cut at a time until I was bleeding in places I couldn't even name. The first time he called me Susan, I thought he was joking. We were at a dinner Madison had hosted. Everything on the table had truffle oil in it. I asked if Ethan could pass me the bread, and he said Susan Madison prefers we don't eat the carbs at the start of the meal. He didn't even glance at me. My name just hung in the air like steam from a dish gone cold. Later that night, I laughed and asked him when Susan became acceptable. He smiled awkwardly and said Madison thinks adults should use first names. I said nothing, but inside something shifted. I stopped being his mother and became someone who needed a name tag. After that, it became more frequent. On phone calls, in emails, even in birthday cards. He stopped calling me Mom altogether. It was as if the role I had in his life had expired. Then there was the night I felt the crushing pain in my chest. It started around midnight, sharp and tight. I called Ethan in a panic. He picked up and sighed into the phone. I told him what I was feeling, and he said, "Call an Uber, Susan." I'm not on call for emotions. Then he hung up. I sat in the hallway, my hand pressed to my chest phone, slipping from my fingers. I remember thinking, this is what dying alone feels like. But it wasn't just the pain that scared me. It was the voice in my head whispering he wouldn't care if you did. It turned out to be a panic attack. The ER doctor said stress can do things to the body that feel like heart failure. I didn't tell Ethan. I didn't want another reminder of how far gone he already was. Madison didn't help. She treated me like a mildly inconvenient employee at a store she didn't want to be in. One birthday, she sent me a gift card to a local salon. It was for Image Makeover Graceful Aging Edition. The fine print included consultations on gray hair correction and posture enhancement. There wasn't a message with it. Just a receipt and her name scribbled on the envelope. I pretended to be grateful. I smiled when I saw them next, and I told her the gesture was thoughtful. But inside, I was screaming. I had given everything to raise Ethan. And now his wife was handing me coupons for how to age more quietly. Still, I told myself they were busy, that Ethan had a demanding job, that young marriages go through seasons. I made every excuse I could find, even when they started piling on top of each other like junk mail. The night before Tom's funeral, I reached for my phone. I was sitting in the bedroom alone, the dress for the service hanging on the closet door. I hadn't worn black since my mother's passing. I stared at the screen, hesitating. Then I typed, "I need you tomorrow." That's all. Just 5 words. I waited. I watched the 3 dots appear, then disappear, then nothing. 5 minutes passed. 10. Finally, a thumbs up emoji landed in my message thread. I stared at it for a long time. Not a sentence. Not a question. Not even an "I'll try." Just a little cartoon hand floating above the words "I need you." I set the phone down slowly. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat still. When your own son reacts to your grief with an emoji, something inside you dies again. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up watching old home videos of Ethan. One of them showed him riding a red tricycle in circles on the porch. He kept calling for me to watch over and over again. "Mom, look at me." "Mom, see." He said it like it was the most natural word in the world. I replayed that part. Then I turned the TV off. I stopped trying after that. I no longer reached out to check in. I didn't send follow-up texts. I let the silence grow until it became its own kind of comfort. At least silence couldn't disappoint me. People think betrayal comes with slammed doors and final words. But sometimes it's a slow removal, a name change, a withheld ride, a voucher in the mail that says you're no longer enough. It's death by 1,000 cuts. And you don't realize how deep they've gone until one day you try to call your son and he answers with a party in the background. The morning sky was a pale, colorless gray, like it couldn't decide whether to rain or just hover in silence. I arrived at the church 15 minutes early, standing outside for a while before going in. The doors were already open, and the scent of lilies hit me before I saw the casket. Tom looked peaceful, but smaller somehow. Death has a way of shrinking people you once thought were larger than life. I stood next to him, my hand brushing the edge of the wooden lid. My breath felt shallow, like my lungs no longer knew what to do without him beside me. Guests trickled in one by one. Neighbors, former coworkers, distant relatives we hadn't seen in years. They came with hushed voices, tight nods, and those long, heavy stares that fill in the words no one dares to speak aloud. I could feel the question behind every look. Where is Ethan? I had no answer. I stood there holding the funeral invitation I had printed myself. His name was there in black ink, second line under beloved son. I stared at it until the letters blurred. Someone had misspelled it. Ethan with an E. It felt like the universe itself no longer recognized him. I didn't correct it. I just kept the card clutched in my hand, pressing it so tightly the edges curled. The pastor began speaking. His voice echoed in the vaulted ceiling, soft but firm, like waves against stone. I barely heard him. My eyes stayed fixed on the door, hoping, then hating myself for hoping. Every time it creaked, I turned my head. Every time it was someone else. At one point, a woman I didn't know leaned in to whisper condolences. Her eyes scanned the rows of pews behind me. She didn't say it out loud, but I saw it written in her face. "Where is your son?" I gave her a smile so tight it hurt my jaw. She patted my arm and walked away. The shame burned under my skin. The casket was lowered later that afternoon. I stood by as they secured the lid, one final sound of wood meeting wood. I looked around again, still empty of the only person who should have been next to me. Ethan didn't come. Instead, my phone vibrated in my bag. I almost didn't check it, but habit overruled instinct. I pulled it out and saw a notification from Madison's Instagram story. Against my better judgment, I opened it. A video played. A tower of black and gold balloons. A glistening cake shaped like a designer purse. Madison grinning wide, holding up a glass of champagne. The caption read 30 and thriving. In the background, I could hear Ethan's voice yelling something I couldn't quite make out. He was laughing. I stared at the screen until the video looped. Then I tapped to the next story. More drinks. People dancing. a close-up of Madison blowing out candles as someone sang off key. All of it happening while I stood in black ankle, deep in muddy grass, watching my husband disappear into the ground. There was no message, no missed call, no apology. Someone walked past and whispered, "Beautiful service." I nodded, unable to find my voice. I wanted to scream, not because Tom deserved better, though he did, but because I did. I deserved to mourn without being turned into a question mark in my own story. After the burial, people gathered inside the church hall for coffee and small sandwiches. I stayed outside, away from the buzz of polite conversation. The breeze had picked up, tugging gently at the edge of my scarf. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the sound of Tom's laugh. I tried to block out the image of Ethan dancing at that party. When I finally walked back inside, a woman was standing near the refreshments, scrolling on her phone. She turned it toward another guest and said Madison's birthday looked wild last night. "Did you see that cake?" The guest looked over at me. Their smile faded into something more polite. Neither of them said a word. They just turned away. I sat down at the farthest table alone. I poured myself a cup of coffee that tasted like ash. In front of me, the program booklet lay half open, Tom's photo in soft black and white. He looked so alive in that picture. Strong, steady. The man who used to fix everything, even when it felt impossible. There was no one left to fix this. I pulled the invitation card from my pocket one more time. Ethan. The typo seemed cruel now. Or maybe it was fitting. Maybe that version of him, the one who loved me, who would have held my hand through all of this, was gone. What remained was someone else. Someone who celebrated while I wept. Someone who forgot what family is supposed to mean. And in that church full of whispered questions and cold coffee, I finally stopped waiting. Ethan wasn't coming. Not to the funeral. Not to the grief. Not to me. The morning after the funeral, the house was still. The kind of stillness that doesn't soothe. It felt like the air itself didn't want to move. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first. Then I heard his voice, bright and casual, like nothing had happened. "Mom?" "Hey?" Crazy night. Madison's party was insane. You should have seen the cake. I didn't answer right away. I was still staring out the window at Tom's rose bushes, the ones he trimmed every Saturday morning. Ethan kept talking, filling the silence with details. Open bar. Everyone showed up. Madison cried when she saw the band. He paused, then cleared his throat. "Listen, we maxed out the cards. The venue deposit came in higher. Can you send 10 grand just to cover the overflow? I'll pay you back." I felt the heat crawl up my neck, but I kept my voice even. "Your father died less than 24 hours ago." The line was quiet for a second, then he laughed. "I mean, yeah, but he's gone right. He wouldn't mind." That's when it cracked. Not loud, not dramatic. Just something small, deep inside me that stopped bending. My voice came out flat but steady. "But I am." He didn't respond. Maybe he expected me to sob, to plead or guilt trip him. But I didn't. I just let the silence speak for itself. I could hear a soft hum on the other end. Maybe the echo of some music still playing in the background. Or maybe just the sound of distance finally becoming real. He tried to pivot, said something about stress, that I was being emotional, that I should relax and remember how much he had going on. I almost laughed. I looked down at my hands resting on the table. They were steady. For the first time in days, they didn't shake. There was nothing left to argue. Nothing left to explain. I told him I needed to go, that I had things to take care of. He said sure. Cool. Just let me know. Then he hung up. I sat there for a long while after that. I thought I'd cry. I didn't. I thought I'd scream. I didn't. What I felt wasn't pain anymore. It was weight, a kind of finality that didn't crush, but cleared. The dishes from the after-service gathering were still in the sink. Half-empty casserole trays and a wilting salad. I rolled up my sleeves and started washing, one plate at a time. The warm water against my skin felt like a small kindness I hadn't earned but accepted anyway. By the time the sink was empty, something in me had settled. I wasn't the same. I would never be the same. But maybe that wasn't the tragedy I thought it would be. Maybe the real loss wasn't that Ethan had changed. Maybe it was that I had refused to see it. Until now. Now I did. The Monday after the funeral, I unlocked the office door to Hill & Sons for the first time in 2 weeks. The silence inside felt different than the silence at home. Here it wasn't about grief. It was about clarity. The company name still hung over the reception desk in gold letters. Hill & Sons. But there were no sons in that building now. Just me, Susan Hill. The last one left, still showing up. I walked down the hallway, heels echoing off the tile, and stepped into Tom's old office. Dust had settled on the windowsill. His calendar was still turned to the previous month. I didn't touch it. I let it sit as it was like a paused breath in a room that no longer needed it. I opened the drawer where we kept the company records, contracts, expense reports, payroll logs. I had gone through these papers for years, but always with Tom beside me. This time, it felt different. I didn't feel sorrow. I felt alert. Ethan's name appeared in dozens of files. Missed meetings, extended leaves, notes from the HR manager about excessive absences. He had been gone 40% of the work year. That wasn't just slack. That was intentional. I pulled out the vehicle logs. One car registered to the company had racked up mileage from Charlotte to Las Vegas during the exact week of Madison's birthday. There were gas charges, hotel bills, and a bottle service tab from a place called Night Garden. The receipts were filed under client entertainment. The only client he was entertaining was his wife. I closed the file and sat back. I didn't cry. I didn't even sigh. I just reached for the phone and called Mark, our family attorney. I told him I wanted a quiet internal audit. Nothing messy. Nothing public. Just truth. He didn't ask questions. He knew better. Within a week, the audit came back. Ethan had been using the corporate card like a personal debit account. Flights, dinners, spa packages. Everything funneled through obscure line items that had somehow avoided scrutiny. I met with Mark again, this time in his office. I brought every piece of evidence, each page paperclipped and highlighted. He laid out the options. I listened carefully. When he was done, I asked him to prepare 2 documents. The first was a formal termination letter. Ethan would no longer be employed by Hill & Sons. Effective immediately. The second was more permanent. A revised will and trust document, removing Ethan from all rights to inheritance, including shares of the business retirement holdings and property titles. I didn't flinch as I signed. I sat in that office for a moment longer, pen still in hand. I thought about how many times I had justified Ethan's behavior. How many times I told myself he was just overwhelmed, misunderstood, stretched too thin. But none of that was true. He wasn't too busy. He had simply stopped caring. The hardest part wasn't the paperwork. It was letting go of the hope that he would change. That he would walk in one day with an apology, with understanding in his eyes. That he'd finally see me again, not as a woman to avoid, but as a mother who mattered. But that day never came. Instead, I made peace with the fact that some doors don't close with slams. Some close slowly with every missed phone call, every disrespectful shrug, every unspoken moment where you realize you are no longer part of someone's priority list. That week, I had the company nameplate removed. The new one just said, Hill, no sons. The receptionist asked if I wanted a replacement installed. I told her not yet. I walked out of the building with the sealed envelope in my purse. One addressed to Ethan. Inside was the termination letter, the legal amendment, and a short handwritten note that simply said, I loved you more than you ever understood. I didn't send it right away. I waited until Friday. I placed it in the mailbox at the end of my driveway and let the door close with a gentle click. Not with anger, just with finality. Later that evening, I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the back porch. The roses Tom had planted were beginning to bloom again. A new season despite everything. I let the warmth of the cup rest in my hands and stared into the quiet sky. There were no fireworks, no dramatic music. Just me breathing without weight for the first time in years. He skipped the funeral, so I skipped him in the will. The door swung open at 10:02 a.m. 2 minutes late as usual. Ethan strolled in like it was just another Monday. His sunglasses were still perched on his head, and he had that familiar half-smirk that once belonged to a teenager who never grew up. He greeted the receptionist with a wink, then made his way down the hallway with a slow, casual pace. One of the junior analysts glanced up from his desk, but quickly looked away. The rest of the office had already heard the whispers. Only Ethan didn't know. I was sitting in the conference room, the blinds pulled halfway shut. The envelope lay flat in front of me. I didn't need to rehearse the words. They had lived inside me long before this day came. Ethan stepped in without knocking. He laughed, loud and careless, and said the same line he always did after a long absence. You good now, Mom, ready to get back to normal. I looked at him. Not past him. Not down. I looked directly at him. Then I slid the envelope across the table. This is your last paycheck. He stared at it like it was written in a language he didn't understand. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he scoffed and dropped into the chair across from me. You're kidding. After everything I've done, I waited. Let the silence breathe. Let the weight of the moment settle where his entitlement used to live. He opened the envelope. Read the termination letter. His brow furrowed, and then his voice rose. This is betrayal. I shook my head. No. This is closure. His face went red, and for the first time in a long time he looked unsure. Not angry. Not defensive. Just lost. Like he was finally seeing that the walls he thought would always hold him had been stripped bare. You can't do this, he said quieter now. Not here. Not like this. I stood up. I can. And I just did. There was a quiet knock. One of the project leads needed to grab something from the cabinet. He paused at the door when he saw us. I nodded once. He stepped in, grabbed a file, and left. Ethan watched him go. His jaw tightened. You humiliated me. I didn't respond. There was nothing more to say. Every answer had already been signed, filed, and delivered. I stepped past him and opened the door. His chair scraped against the floor as he stood slowly, like he finally understood this wasn't a negotiation. You really meant it, he said. All of it. I looked back once. I meant every word. You skipped your father's funeral. You skipped the life we built. Now I'm skipping you from everything else. He didn't speak again, just turned and walked down the hallway slower this time. the same hallway where his name once echoed with promise. Now it echoed with absence. He passed 2 employees on his way out. They didn't speak. They didn't nod. Just watched in silence as the son of the founder left with an envelope and nothing else. The door closed behind him with a soft click. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean, like sweeping the last bit of dust from a floor you thought you'd never see again. There was sadness, yes, but also space. A wide, clear space where I could finally stand on my own. She came in like a storm. Madison pushed through the glass doors so hard they bounced against the frame. Her heels hit the tile in sharp, angry taps as she headed straight for my office. I didn't flinch. I had been expecting this. Her voice came before her face did, echoing down the hallway, furious and shrill. "How could you do this to Ethan? You ruined him." She didn't sit. She stood arms crossed, pacing like a lioness in too tight a cage. I stayed in my chair and opened the drawer beside me. I pulled out the file. The one with the revised estate documents. The new will. The final proof. I placed it on the desk between us. She didn't touch it. Just stared at me, shaking with rage. "You're punishing him because he chose me." I met her eyes without blinking. "No. I'm setting a boundary because he forgot who I was." She snapped. "You're bitter. You're jealous that he has a life you never had. That he's not stuck in some sad little office surrounded by papers and grief." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look away. "No. I'm just finally done." For a moment, there was silence. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her anger had nowhere left to go. It hit the wall of my comm and slid right off. She stepped closer, but it didn't matter. Her words, her fury, none of it reached me now. I had already made peace with the goodbye. I pointed to the file again. His name's not there. Not in the trust. Not in the will. Not on the deed to the house or the shares of this company. She finally picked up the folder, flipping through the pages with shaking fingers. Her breathing was sharp. When she reached the last page, her hands dropped to her sides. She looked up at me, but there was no plea in her eyes. Just disbelief. The kind of shock that comes when the world stops giving second chances. I stood, walked to the door, opened it for her. "This meeting's over, Madison." She hesitated, then gathered her bag. As she passed me, she muttered under her breath, "You'll regret this." I didn't reply. I just watched her leave. Her perfume lingered in the air like a closing chapter. When the door shut behind her, I sat back down and let the quiet return. It was solid now, stronger than before. It didn't ache anymore. I had not acted out of anger. I had acted out of truth. And sometimes truth comes dressed in finality. I looked down at the empty space on the desk. For the first time in years, it felt like mine again. It was tucked inside the back of Tom's dresser drawer, folded neatly between an old baseball cap and a pack of unopened golf tees. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just organizing his things for the first time since the funeral. My fingers found it by accident, but the moment I unfolded the letter, I knew it was meant for me. The ink had faded a little. The handwriting was steady, like it always had been. He must have written it months ago, maybe longer. The words were simple, but one line stopped my breath. "If he fails, you don't fail yourself." I read that sentence over and over until the paper felt warm in my hands. It was the permission I didn't know I needed. The blessing to release what had already let go of me. That afternoon, I went out back with a pair of gloves and a small shovel. The roses Tom planted were overgrown, but the roots were still strong. I trimmed the branches, pulled weeds, and dug new holes along the fence line. The sun was low, golden soft against my shoulders. For hours, I worked in silence. Not the heavy silence I used to carry, but a quiet that felt like peace. I wasn't trying to fix anything. I was just tending to what was still mine. Inside, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I found the donation page for a foundation that supports widows. I typed in 20,000. Clicked submit. Closed the screen. I didn't need a receipt. Ethan hadn't called in weeks. The first few days, I would still glance at my phone out of habit. Now I didn't. And when I thought of him, it no longer felt like a wound. Just a memory I had stopped watering. The letter stayed on my nightstand. I didn't frame it or put it away. I just kept it near. A reminder that love doesn't end where loss begins. And that letting go is sometimes the last and strongest form of love there is. I went to bed early that night. The windows were open. I could hear the wind moving through the trees. And for the first time in a long while, I slept through the night without dreaming of what could have been. I used to believe that being a mother meant giving everything and asking nothing in return. I thought love was measured by how much pain you could carry for someone else. But time has a way of peeling back those beliefs and showing you where they start to crack. Grief didn't just take my husband. It exposed every part of me I had ignored. It showed me what I was still clinging to, even when it hurt. Being a mother doesn't mean enduring forever. It doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity at the altar of unconditional love. There is a line even in love where self-respect begins. If your child chooses to abandon you in grief, you have the right to abandon them in comfort. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. That's choosing peace over pain. I did not make my choices out of anger. I made them out of honesty. I finally chose myself after decades of choosing everyone else first. There is no joy in cutting someone out of your life. But there is relief. There is quiet. There is space to breathe again. I still love Ethan. But love and proximity are not the same. Forgiveness does not mean return. I tend my garden. I sleep through the night. I no longer explain myself to people who never tried to understand me in the first place. I didn't lose a son. I just finally saw him for who he is. And I saw myself too. Whole, tired, still standing, and finally free.